The wedding guests gasped as Daniel Barrett strode past the bride, beautiful, radiant Lydia, and stopped directly in front of her younger sister. Emily's breath caught as his weathered hand extended toward her, not her sister who'd just been married an hour ago. "Miss Emily," he said, his deep voice cutting through the shocked whispers, "would you honor me with this dance?" In that moment, in front of the entire town of Silver Ridge, the overlooked sister became the only woman in the room. Welcome to my story. Follow along to see how one dance changed everything, and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Ridge, Colorado, painting the weathered storefronts in shades of gold and amber. It was April 15th, 1875, a date Emily Carter would remember not for joy, but for the familiar ache of invisibility that settled deeper into her bones with each passing hour. She stood before the cracked mirror in her childhood bedroom, adjusting the pale blue dress that had been hastily altered from one of Lydia's cast-offs. The fabric hung loosely on her smaller frame, despite Mrs. Henderson's best efforts with needle and thread. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she pinned a small cluster of wildflowers into her dark hair, flowers she'd picked herself that morning from the meadow behind their house, knowing full well that all the cultivated roses from their mother's garden had been reserved for the bride. "Emily! For heaven's sake, stop dawdling!" Her mother's sharp voice carried up the narrow staircase. "Your sister needs you." Of course she did. Lydia always needed her to hold the train of her dress, needed her to fetch forgotten items, needed her to fade gracefully into the background so that Lydia's light could shine all the brighter. Emily had played this role for 23 years, and she'd grown quite accomplished at it. She descended the stairs slowly, each step a measured reminder to keep her shoulders back, her expression pleasant but unremarkable. These were the lessons learned through years of being the other Carter girl, the one whose name people struggled to remember, the one merchants addressed as Miss Lydia's sister. The parlor buzzed with activity. Lydia stood at its center like a swan among sparrows, her wedding dress a cascade of imported silk and delicate lace that their father had spent nearly 3 months' earnings to procure. Her golden hair was arranged in elaborate curls that caught the light streaming through the windows, and her laugh, that practiced tinkling laugh she'd perfected at finishing school, filled the air as she accepted compliments from the gathering of women who'd come to help prepare her for the ceremony. "Oh, Emily, there you are." Lydia turned, her blue eyes bright with the kind of happiness that came from getting exactly what one wanted. "My gloves! I can't find my gloves anywhere!" Emily wordlessly retrieved the white kid gloves from the side table where Lydia had carelessly tossed them not 10 minutes earlier. As she handed them over, their fingers briefly touched, and Emily felt the tremor of excitement running through her sister's hand. "Nervous?" Emily asked quietly. Lydia's perfect smile faltered for just a moment. "Why would I be nervous? I'm marrying Thomas Walker. Every girl in Silver Ridge would trade places with me in a heartbeat." Her eyes flickered over Emily's dress, and something that might have been pity crossed her features. "That dress looks nice on you, Em. The color brings out your eyes." It was the kind of compliment one gave when trying to be kind about something decidedly not beautiful. Emily had heard variations of it her entire life. "Your handwriting is so neat, Emily." "You're so good with numbers, Emily." "What a practical girl you are, Emily." Never beautiful, never charming, never the one who turned heads when she walked into a room. "Girls, it's time." Their father, Harrison Carter, appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with pride as he looked at Lydia. He'd been a successful merchant once, before the fire that took his store 5 years ago. Now he worked as a clerk at the bank, and this wedding, this alliance with the Walker family, represented a return to respectability he'd thought lost forever. The walk to the church felt longer than usual. Emily carried Lydia's train, careful to keep it from touching the dusty street. Behind them, their mother fussed and worried, adjusting Lydia's veil every few steps. Ahead, the white steeple of Silver Ridge Methodist Church rose against the crystal blue sky, its bell already beginning to toll. The church was packed. Thomas Walker's family occupied the front pews on the right, his father, Judge Walker, sitting rigid and proper, his mother adorned in purple silk that marked her as the town's leading lady. The left side held the Carter family's allies and friends, though they were noticeably fewer in number and considerably less grand in their attire. Emily took her place as maid of honor, holding Lydia's bouquet of imported white roses while trying not to think about how the thorns, inadequately removed, were pricking her palms through her thin gloves. The organ wheezed to life, and Reverend Matthews took his position at the altar. Thomas Walker stood waiting, tall and impeccably dressed in a black suit that had clearly come from Denver, or perhaps even further east. He was handsome in that careful, calculated way, every hair in place, every button polished, every gesture measured and appropriate. He was 31, established in his father's law practice, owner of one of the finest houses on Maple Street. He was everything a young woman of Silver Ridge was supposed to want. Emily had never understood why she didn't. Oh, she'd tried. When Thomas had first begun calling on Lydia 6 months ago, Emily had attempted to summon some feeling of envy or longing. He was handsome, wealthy, respectable, all the things her mother constantly reminded her she should be seeking in a husband. But watching him court Lydia had been like watching a business transaction slowly unfold. He brought the right gifts at the right times, said the right words in the right tone, played the part of the besotted suitor with the same precision he likely used to draft legal documents. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Matthews began, his voice sonorous in the hushed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the joining of Thomas Andrew Walker and Lydia Rose Carter in holy matrimony." Emily let the words wash over her, her gaze drifting beyond the altar to the stained glass window that depicted the Good Shepherd. The morning light transformed the colored glass into jewels, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. She found herself thinking about the book hidden beneath her bed, a worn copy of Jane Eyre she'd read so many times the pages were soft as cloth. Jane, plain and small and fierce, who refused to be anyone's second choice, who demanded to be seen as an equal, who chose love on her own terms or not at all. If anyone here present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause felt heavier today, though Emily couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the way Thomas's hand rested on Lydia's, possessive rather than tender. Perhaps it was the calculating gleam in Judge Walker's eye as he surveyed his son's bride like a new acquisition. Perhaps it was simply the weight of another ending, another door closing, another reminder that Emily's life would continue exactly as it had always been, in the shadows, at the edges, needed but never wanted. The silence stretched, and then Reverend Matthews continued with visible relief. "Do you, Thomas Andrew Walker, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Thomas's voice was clear, confident, the voice of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Do you, Lydia Rose Carter, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part, poorer, for better or for worse, as long as you both shall live?" Emily watched her sister's profile, saw the slight tremor in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened on her bouquet. For just a moment, Lydia's eyes darted sideways, finding Emily's, and in them was something Emily had never seen before. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Then it was gone, replaced by that brilliant smile. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by God in the state of Colorado, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Thomas lifted Lydia's veil with practiced efficiency and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so brief and proper it might have been a handshake. The church erupted in applause, and Emily stepped forward to hand Lydia back her bouquet, their eyes meeting once more. This time, Lydia's expression was unreadable, already shifting into her new role as Mrs. Thomas Walker. The walk back down the aisle felt endless. Emily followed the newly married couple, her smile fixed in place, nodding at the faces turned toward them, most barely registering her presence, their attention fixed on the golden couple ahead. She caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Such a beautiful bride. The Walkers must be so pleased. Perfect match, absolutely perfect. The younger sister? Oh, she's sweet, very devoted to her family." That last comment from Mrs. Thornton, the mayor's wife, carried that particular tone Emily knew so well. The voice people used when they had nothing really good to say, but felt obligated to say something kind. Outside the church, rice flew through the air like snow, and Lydia laughed as she and Thomas hurried toward the waiting carriage that would take them to the reception at the Walker home. Emily stood on the church steps, still holding her small bouquet of wildflowers, watching the carriage disappear around the corner. "Emily, dear, don't just stand there." Her mother appeared at her elbow, already fretting. "We need to get to the reception. There's so much to do, and you know Lydia will need—" "Yes, Mother." Emily followed dutifully, her feet automatically finding the familiar path to the Walker residence, the finest house on Maple Street with its wraparound porch and imported wallpaper and running water pumped right into the kitchen, luxuries most in Silver Ridge could only dream of. The reception was already in full swing when they arrived. The Walkers' parlor had been transformed into a wonderland of white roses and silk ribbons. A string quartet from Denver played in the corner, and servants, actual servants, not just neighbors helping out, circulated with trays of delicacies most of the town had never tasted. Oysters that had been packed in ice and rushed from the coast, champagne that sparkled like liquid gold, tiny cakes decorated with sugar flowers so delicate they looked real. Emily found herself relegated to a corner near the punch bowl, holding a cup she didn't really want, watching as Lydia and Thomas held court in the center of the room. Lydia had never looked more beautiful, her cheeks flushed with champagne and triumph. She'd gotten everything she'd ever wanted: the wealthy husband, the grand house, the position as one of Silver Ridge's leading ladies. Their father stood nearby, chest puffed with pride, already deep in conversation with Judge Walker about some business venture or another. Their mother fluttered between groups of women, accepting congratulations with barely concealed relief that at least one of her daughters had made a successful match. "Not much of a dancer." The voice was deep, unfamiliar, with a slight drawl that marked the speaker as not from Colorado. Emily turned to find a man standing beside her, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. He was tall, taller than Thomas, but without the lawyer's studied elegance. This man looked like he'd been carved from the very mountains that surrounded Silver Ridge, all sharp angles and weathered strength. His suit was clean but simple, clearly not made by any fancy tailor, and he wore it like a costume he couldn't wait to shed. Dark hair, longer than was fashionable, curled slightly over his collar, and his eyes, God, his eyes were the color of the sky just before a storm, that deep electric blue that promised change was coming. I beg your pardon?" Emily managed, realizing she'd been staring. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not the practiced smile of someone like Thomas, but something genuine and slightly amused. "I asked if you weren't much of a dancer. You've been standing here for the past 20 minutes, and no fewer than 3 young men have approached and then veered away at the last moment." Heat flooded Emily's cheeks. She hadn't realized anyone had been watching her, much less noticing the subtle rejections she'd grown so accustomed to. Perhaps they simply remembered urgent business elsewhere. Perhaps. He took a sip from his own cup, and Emily noticed his hands. Strong, calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them rather than just with words and papers. Or perhaps they're fools. The directness of the compliment, if it was a compliment, caught her off guard. She wasn't used to this, to being noticed, to being spoken to as if she were worth noticing. "You don't know me, sir." Perhaps those young men were showing excellent judgment. He turned to face her fully then, and the intensity of his gaze made her pulse quicken. "Daniel Barrett," he said, extending his hand in a way that was just informal enough to be slightly scandalous. "I'm the trail guide Judge Walker hired to survey that land he bought up north. And you're Emily Carter, the bride's sister." She hesitated before taking his hand, and when she did, the warmth of his palm against hers sent an unexpected shiver through her. "How did you know who I was?" I asked. Simple, direct, no flowery explanations or elaborate flattery. "You looked interesting." "Interesting." Emily couldn't help but laugh, though it came out slightly bitter. That's a word often used to describe things that aren't quite beautiful enough for better adjectives. Daniel's brow furrowed. "Is that what you think? That interesting is a consolation prize?" He gestured toward the center of the room where Lydia was holding court, surrounded by admirers. "Your sister is beautiful, I'll grant you that. The way a painting is beautiful, or a statue. Perfect to look at, but I bet if you asked her about the last book she read for pleasure, she'd have to think hard about it. Emily's breath caught. That's rather presumptuous. You're right, it is. He didn't look particularly sorry about it. But I'm also willing to bet you could tell me not just the last book you read, but quote your favorite passages from memory. I'd wager you notice things others miss, like how Mrs. Walker keeps touching her pearls when she's nervous, or how the judge's laugh never quite reaches his eyes. You see people, really see them, don't you? Emily stared at him, this stranger who'd somehow seen straight through her in a matter of minutes. How could you possibly know that? Because you're standing here at your sister's wedding reception, and instead of looking bitter or envious, you're observing, taking it all in. There's a difference between being overlooked and choosing to remain at the edges where you can actually see what's happening. He paused, then added more quietly, I recognize it because I do the same thing. Before Emily could respond, the quartet struck up a waltz, and couples began moving onto the makeshift dance floor. Daniel set down his cup and turned to her with an expression that was both challenge and invitation. Dance with me. I'm not very... Emily stumbled over her words, acutely aware that people would see them, would wonder why this stranger was asking the plain sister to dance when there were prettier girls available. I didn't ask if you were good at it, Daniel said, his hand still extended. I asked you to dance with me. There was something in his voice, in the steady way he looked at her, that made Emily feel as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff. One step forward would change everything. One step back would keep her safe in the shadows where she'd always lived. She thought of Jane Eyre. She thought of all the dances she'd watched from the sidelines. She thought of the tremor in Lydia's voice when she'd said, I do. Emily placed her hand in Daniel's. He led her onto the floor with a confidence that suggested he was more familiar with dancing than his rough appearance might indicate. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, and when they began to move, Emily found herself following his lead as naturally as breathing. You lied, he said conversationally as they turned. You dance beautifully. I never said I couldn't. Emily was acutely aware of the eyes on them, of the whispers starting. People are staring. Let them. Daniel spun her, and for a moment the room blurred around them. Does it bother you? Yes. Number? I don't know. Emily was finding it hard to think with his hand in hers, with the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. I'm not used to being noticed. That's not the same as not being worth noticing. They danced in silence for a moment, and Emily became aware of other things. The scent of leather and something like pine that clung to him, the way he moved with a grace that spoke of complete comfort in his own body, the slight smile that played at his lips when she successfully followed a particularly complex turn. Why did you really ask me to dance? She finally asked. Daniel considered the question, his blue eyes thoughtful. Because when I walked in here, I saw a room full of people playing parts. Your sister, playing the perfect bride. Thomas Walker, playing the devoted groom. Everyone saying the right things, making the right gestures, and all of it as hollow as a reed. Then I saw you standing there with your wildflowers while everyone else had roses, and you were the only real thing in the whole damn room. Emily's steps faltered. Mr. Barrett, Daniel. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that proper introductions shouldn't be. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I know you picked those wildflowers yourself this morning. There's still dirt under your fingernails from digging them up. I know you've read that book in your reticule so many times the binding is coming apart. I can see the loosened threads. I know you've been holding your shoulders so straight for so long that they're probably aching, but you won't let yourself relax because someone once told you that proper ladies don't slouch. Emily's throat tightened. Stop. I know you're brilliant and overlooked and so used to being both that you've convinced yourself it's what you deserve. His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. And I know that's the biggest tragedy in this whole room, including whatever loveless arrangement your sister just signed herself into. The music ended, but Daniel didn't release her immediately. They stood there in the middle of the dance floor, his hand still at her waist, hers still in his, while around them, couples separated and reformed for the next dance. "I should go," Emily whispered, though she made no move to step away. "Should you?" Daniel's thumb brushed against her palm, so lightly she might have imagined it. Or is that just what Emily Carter is supposed to do? Disappear back into the corner, back into the shadows, back into being needed but never wanted. "You don't understand. Then help me understand." The quartet began another song, something slower, more intimate. "One more dance. Talk to me. Tell me why you're so determined to be invisible when you're the most vivid person here." Emily looked around the room, at her mother, now watching with barely concealed horror, at Lydia, whose perfect smile had frozen into something like a mask, at Thomas, whose expression suggested he was calculating exactly how this unexpected development might affect his family's reputation. Then she looked back at Daniel, at those storm blue eyes that saw too much, at the hand still extended toward her in invitation and challenge. "One more dance," she agreed, and let him pull her back into his arms. This time, they danced closer, propriety be damned. Emily could feel the whispers spreading like wildfire through the room, could practically hear Mrs. Thornton's scandalized gasp. But for once, she didn't care. Daniel was right. She'd spent so long being invisible that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. "Tell me about the book," he said, nodding toward her reticule. "Jane Eyre," Emily admitted. It's about a woman who refuses to be less than she is, even when the world tells her she should be grateful for scraps. And you read it over and over because sometimes I forget that's possible." The honesty of it surprised her. "Sometimes I need reminding that plain girls with no fortune can still insist on being treated as equals." Daniel's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You're not plain. Please don't." "You're not," he insisted. "Plain is forgettable. Plain is unremarkable. You? You're the kind of woman a man could spend a lifetime trying to understand and still find new mysteries. That's not plain, Emily. That's fascinating." Emily's eyes burned with sudden tears. "Why are you saying these things?" "Because someone should have said them years ago." Daniel guided them toward the edge of the dance floor, toward the French doors that opened onto the garden. "Because I've spent the last 10 years guiding people through wilderness, and I've learned to recognize when someone's lost. And because from the moment I saw you standing there with your wildflowers and your straight shoulders and that look in your eyes like you were cataloging everything for some future story you'd tell yourself, I knew I had to know you." They were in the garden now, the music fading behind them, the cool evening air a relief after the stifling warmth of the crowded parlor. Paper lanterns hung from the trees, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. Emily knew she should go back inside, knew this was beyond improper, knew that by tomorrow everyone in Silver Ridge would be talking about how the younger Carter girl had disappeared into the garden with that rough-looking stranger. She found she didn't care. "What wilderness am I lost in, then?" she asked, trying for lightness, but achieving only a kind of breathless curiosity. Daniel released her from the dance position, but didn't step away. Instead, he reached out and gently touched one of the wildflowers in her hair. The kind where you've convinced yourself that wanting things for yourself is selfish. The kind where you think love is something that happens to other people, prettier people, luckier people. His fingers lingered near her temple, not quite touching. The kind where you've forgotten that you have the right to choose your own path instead of just following in someone else's footsteps. "And you think you can guide me out?" Emily meant it to sound skeptical, but it came out wondering. "No." Daniel dropped his hand and Emily immediately missed its nearness. "I think you can guide yourself out. You just need someone to remind you that there's an out to find." From inside came the sound of glasses clinking. Speeches were beginning. Emily knew she should be there, standing beside Lydia, playing her role as the devoted sister. But her feet seemed rooted to this spot, to this moment, to this man who looked at her like she was something worth discovering. "They'll be looking for me," she said, though she made no move to leave. "Probably." Daniel leaned against the garden wall, his posture relaxed but his eyes intent. "What will you do?" "What I always do. What I'm supposed to do." But even as she said it, Emily felt something rebellious stirring in her chest. "Go back inside, smile, help serve cake, Make sure Lydia's train doesn't get stepped on. Be useful. Is that what you want to do? No one had ever asked her that before. Not once in her 23 years had anyone asked Emily Carter what she wanted. I want. She paused, searching for words she'd never let herself think, much less speak. I want to matter to someone. Not because I'm useful or helpful or convenient, but because I'm me. I want someone to choose me first, not settle for me because they couldn't have my sister, or because I'm the only one left, or because I come with a good dowry, or connections. The words tumbled out faster now, years of suppressed longing breaking free. I want to have conversations about books and ideas and dreams that seem impossible. I want to dance without worrying if I'm pretty enough to deserve the attention. I want to be seen, really seen, and still be wanted. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. Emily's cheeks burned with mortification. She'd just spilled her deepest desires to a complete stranger, a man she'd known for less than an hour. I'm sorry, she began. I don't know why I... Saturday. Daniel interrupted her. There's a barn dance at the Miller's farm. Nothing fancy, just neighbors and fiddle music and people who dance because they want to, not because it's expected. He pushed off from the wall, standing to his full height. Come with me. Emily's heart stopped. What? Come to the dance with me. We'll talk about books. We'll argue about ideas. I'll tell you about the places I've seen beyond Silver Ridge, and you'll tell me about the worlds you've found in your reading. He stepped closer, and Emily had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. And we'll dance, not because it's proper or expected, but because we want to. You don't even know me, Emily protested weakly. I know enough. Daniel's voice was certain. I know you're brave enough to keep hoping even when life keeps disappointing you. I know you're smart enough to see through all this pretense, but kind enough not to condemn people for it. I know you notice everything but judge little. He paused. And I know that if I don't at least try to convince you to give me a chance, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. From inside, Emily heard her mother's voice calling her name, sharp with irritation. The spell broke, and reality crashed back. She was Emily Carter, the plain sister, the useful one, the one who didn't make scenes or cause gossip or run off with unsuitable men. I have to go, she said, gathering her skirts. Daniel caught her hand as she turned to leave. Saturday, he said again, not a question this time. I'll be at your front door at 6 o'clock. You can decide then whether to come with me or not. But I'll be there. Emily looked down at their joined hands, his so large and rough, hers small and ink-stained, and felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening to let light into a room that had been dark for so long she'd forgotten colors existed. I make no promises, she said. I'm not asking for any. He released her hand slowly, reluctantly. Just think about it. Think about what you want, not what you should do. Emily nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and fled back toward the house. She paused at the French doors, looking back to find Daniel still watching her, a slight smile on his face that suggested he knew something she didn't. Inside, the reception continued in full swing. Lydia was cutting the cake, her laugh bright and brittle as crystal. Thomas stood beside her, one possessive hand on her waist, already looking bored. Emily's mother appeared at her elbow immediately. Where have you been? She hissed. Everyone's been asking about you. It's embarrassing enough that you... She stopped, her eyes widening as she took in Emily's appearance. You've been dancing. Your hair is mussed and your cheeks are flushed. Emily Carter, what have you been doing? Living, Emily said, the word escaping before she could stop it. Her mother's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. I beg your pardon? Nothing, Mother. Emily smoothed her hair, tucked the wildflower that had come loose back into place. I was just getting some air. But as she moved through the rest of the reception, helping serve cake, adjusting Lydia's train, being useful and invisible and needed, Emily's mind kept drifting to storm blue eyes and work rough hands and a voice that asked her what she wanted as if her answer mattered. Saturday, 6 o'clock. She made no promises, not even to herself, but for the first time in her life, Emily Carter thought she might want to be more than just the shadow cast by her sister's light. She thought she might want to step into the sun herself, even if it meant getting burned. The reception wound down as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Lydia and Thomas departed for their wedding night at the Grand Hotel before their honeymoon trip to Denver, and Emily stood with her parents on the Walkers' front porch, throwing rice and rose petals and waving goodbye. As the carriage disappeared around the corner, Emily felt her mother's hand on her arm. "That man you were dancing with," she began carefully. "Mrs. Thornton says he's some kind of wilderness guide. Hardly appropriate company for a young lady of good family." "He was a guest at the wedding, Mother. It would have been rude to refuse him a dance." "One dance, perhaps. But you were gone for nearly half an hour, Emily. People noticed. People talked." Emily thought about denying it, about making excuses, about doing what she'd always done, smoothing things over, keeping the peace, being the good daughter. Instead, she heard herself say, "Let them talk." Her father, who'd been silent until now, turned to look at her with surprise. "Emily? I danced with a man who asked me to dance. I had a conversation with someone who found me interesting enough to talk to. If that's scandal-worthy in Silver Ridge, then perhaps the problem isn't with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's parents stared at her as if she'd suddenly sprouted wings or spoken in tongues. She'd never talked back, never challenged them, never been anything other than dutiful and accommodating. "You're overwrought," her mother finally decided. "It's been a long day and weddings can be emotional. You'll feel more yourself in the morning." But as Emily lay in her bed that night, still in her altered dress because she couldn't bear to take it off just yet, she knew her mother was wrong. She wouldn't feel more herself in the morning, she'd feel less herself, because every morning for 23 years she'd woken up and chosen to be what everyone expected rather than what she wanted to be. The wildflowers from her hair lay on her pillow, already beginning to wilt. She picked one up, twirling it between her fingers, thinking about Daniel's words. "You were the only real thing in the whole damn room." Saturday, 6 o'clock. Emily pressed the flower between the pages of Jane Eyre, marking the place where Jane declares, "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will." Perhaps it was time to test whether that was true. The days that followed Lydia's wedding passed in a strange fog for Emily. She went through her usual routines, helping her mother with the household, visiting the mercantile for supplies, reading to Mrs. Henderson, who was laid up with rheumatism, but everything felt different, charged with an electricity she couldn't quite name. Every time she heard horses on the street, her heart leapt. Every tall figure glimpsed from the corner of her eye made her pulse race. And always, always, there was Saturday looming ahead like a mountain she wasn't sure she had the courage to climb. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected trial. Emily was in the garden tending to her mother's roses, the ones that hadn't been sacrificed for Lydia's wedding, when she heard voices from the front parlor through the open window. "It's really quite concerning, Margaret." That was Mrs. Thornton's voice, pitched in that false concern that meant she was about to deliver gossip wrapped in worry. Everyone at the reception was talking about it, that rough-looking man practically dragging poor Emily into the garden. And she was gone for so long. "I'm sure it was nothing improper," Emily's mother responded, though her voice lacked conviction. "Emily knows better than to—" "Oh, I'm not suggesting she did anything deliberately scandalous," Mrs. Thornton interrupted. "But you know how naive she is, always with her nose in a book. Men like that, drifters and wilderness guides, they know how to take advantage of spinsters who've given up hope of proper courtship." Emily's hands stilled on the rose stems. Spinster. She was 23, hardly ancient, but in Silver Ridge, any woman unmarried past 21 was beginning to edge toward that dreaded label. "He's not exactly a drifter," her mother said weakly. "Judge Walker hired him to survey land." "A temporary position," Mrs. Thornton dismissed. "He'll be gone within the month, mark my words. And where will that leave Emily's reputation? You really must speak to her, Margaret. For her own good." Emily didn't wait to hear her mother's response. She quietly made her way back into the house through the kitchen door, her cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. Mrs. Thornton, who'd been married at 17 to a man 30 years her senior because her parents needed the financial security, dared to lecture about proper courtship? That evening, at dinner, her mother broached the subject with all the subtlety of a cavalry charge. Emily, dear, I've been thinking about your future. Emily set down her fork carefully. Her father continued eating his beef stew, but she could tell he was listening by the way his chewing slowed. Have you? Emily kept her voice neutral. You're 23 now. Most of your friends are married, starting families. And with Lydia settled, well, it's time we made more of an effort to find you a suitable match. A suitable match, Emily repeated slowly. Like Mr. Whitmore, who's 57 and needs someone to raise his 6 children. Or perhaps young Timothy Banks, who everyone knows drinks himself into a stupor every night at the saloon. Emily. Her mother's fork clattered against her plate. That's no way for a young lady to speak. But it's true, isn't it? Those are the suitable matches available to me. The leftovers, the desperate, the ones who need a housekeeper more than a wife. You're being dramatic, her mother said, but her eyes couldn't meet Emily's. There are other options. Your father could speak to his connections at the bank. Perhaps a clerk from Denver. Someone just starting out who wouldn't mind. Who wouldn't mind settling for the plain sister? Emily finished. Someone who could overlook my unfortunate tendency to think and read and have opinions if I came with enough of a dowry. That's enough, her father said quietly, finally looking up from his meal. Emily, your mother is trying to help. Your display at the wedding has people talking. It's not good for your prospects. What prospects? Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The prospect of becoming someone's burden? The prospect of spending my life apologizing for not being Lydia? She took a shaky breath. I'd rather be alone than be someone's last resort. She fled to her room before either parent could respond, closing the door firmly behind her. Her copy of Jane Eyre lay on her bedside table, the pressed wildflower still marking her place. She picked it up, running her fingers over the worn cover, thinking about Daniel's words. You've forgotten that you have the right to choose your own path. Thursday brought a letter from Lydia, delivered by a boy from the Grand Hotel. Emily recognized her sister's flowery handwriting immediately and opened it with trembling fingers. Dearest Emily, it read, I hope this letter finds you well. Thomas and I are enjoying our honeymoon in Denver immensely. The city is so sophisticated, so different from Silver Ridge. Thomas has been wonderful, showing me all the finest shops and restaurants. Everyone here is so impressed when they learn he's Judge Walker's son. I must confess, I heard about your little scandal at the reception. Mrs. Walker wrote to Thomas about it, expressing her concern about the family reputation. Please, Emily, be careful. I know it must have been flattering to have a man pay attention to you, but you mustn't let desperation cloud your judgment. Men like that, drifters and adventurers, they don't offer real futures. They offer pretty words and then disappear, leaving broken hearts and ruined reputations behind. I'm telling you this because I love you. Don't throw away your chance at respectability for a few moments of feeling special. It's not worth it. Your loving sister, Lydia, Mrs. Thomas Walker. Emily read the letter 3 times, each reading making her angrier than the last. Desperation. Flattering. A few moments of feeling special. Even from Denver, even in the midst of her honeymoon, Lydia couldn't resist reminding Emily of her place. She crumpled the letter and threw it into the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken. Then she sat at her small writing desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. But after sitting there for nearly an hour, she couldn't find the words to respond. What could she say? That she wasn't desperate, she was awakening? That Daniel hadn't flattered her, he'd seen her? That feeling special for even a moment was worth more than a lifetime of respectability, if that respectability meant invisibility? Friday passed in a blur of preparations for the church social on Sunday. Emily helped her mother bake pies, her hands working automatically while her mind wandered. 6 o'clock. Less than 24 hours. Would he really come? Or had it been the champagne talking, the romance of a wedding making him say things he didn't mean? That night, sleep eluded her entirely. She lay in bed listening to the grandfather clock in the hallway chime away the hours. At 3 in the morning, she gave up and lit a candle, pulling out Jane Eyre again. But even her beloved book couldn't hold her attention. Her eyes kept drifting to her wardrobe, mentally cataloging her dresses, all of them practical and plain, suitable for the minister's daughter or the schoolmarm, not for a woman going dancing with a man who looked at her like she was fascinating. Saturday dawned gray and overcast, clouds hanging low over the mountains like a threat. Emily went through her morning chores mechanically, aware of her mother's watchful eyes following her everywhere. The tension in the house was palpable, though nothing was said directly. Her father left early for the bank, claiming extra work, but Emily suspected he simply wanted to avoid whatever scene was brewing. By afternoon, the clouds had darkened further, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Emily stood at her bedroom window, watching the street turn to mud, her heart sinking. Surely he wouldn't come in this weather. It would give him the perfect excuse to forget his impulsive invitation. At 5 o'clock, her mother appeared in her doorway. "You're not planning anything foolish, are you?" Emily turned from the window. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play coy with me, Emily. I know that man said something to you at the wedding. You've been distracted all week." "He invited me to a dance," Emily said simply. "The barn dance at the miller's farm." Her mother's face went pale. "You cannot seriously be considering going." "Why not?" "It's just a dance, neighbors and fiddle music, nothing scandalous." "Going with him would be scandalous." "Emily, you don't know anything about this man. He could be anyone, could have done anything. And the miller's farm is 3 miles outside town. You'd be alone with him in a carriage for 3 miles each way." "I've been alone with Mr. Whitmore in his carriage when he drove me home from church," Emily pointed out. "No one called that scandalous." "That's different, and you know it. Mr. Whitmore is a respectable widower, a member of our community. This Daniel Barrett is a stranger, a drifter, who'll be gone as soon as Judge Walker's business is concluded." Emily moved to her wardrobe, pulling out her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the color in her eyes, one of the few items that had been made specifically for her rather than altered from Lydia's cast-offs. "Emily, I forbid it." The words hung in the air between them. Emily's hand stilled on the dress. In 23 years, her mother had never had to forbid her anything, because Emily had never given her reason to. "If you do this," her mother continued, her voice shaking, "if you shame our family this way, there will be consequences." Emily turned to face her mother fully. "What consequences?" "Will you send me away? Where would I go? Will you cut me off? With what money? Will you refuse to speak to me? You barely speak to me now unless you need something done." "How dare you? I've been invisible my entire life, Mother. A shadow, a helper, a second thought. The only consequence you could threaten me with that would actually matter is making me more invisible. And I'm not sure that's even possible." Her mother's face crumpled, and for a moment, Emily saw not the controlling matriarch but a frightened woman who'd spent her own life following rules, making safe choices, and couldn't understand why her daughter would risk doing otherwise. "He'll hurt you," she whispered. "Men like that always do. They make you feel special, important, seen, and then they leave and you're left with nothing but a ruined reputation and a broken heart." Emily crossed the room and took her mother's hands. They were shaking. "Maybe," she admitted, "maybe you're right. Maybe he won't even show up. Maybe it's all a cruel joke. But Mother, I have to know. I have to try. Because the alternative is spending the rest of my life wondering what if, and I think that would break my heart even more." Her mother pulled her hands away. "Then you're a fool." She left the room, closing the door with a decisive click. Emily stood there for a moment, then continued getting ready. She pinned her hair up more carefully than usual, allowing a few tendrils to frame her face. She pinched her cheeks for color and bit her lips to make them rosier. Looking in the mirror, she still saw Emily Carter, plain and unremarkable. But maybe, just maybe, there was something else there too. A glimmer of possibility, of potential, of becoming. The clock downstairs chimed 5:30. Emily made her way to the parlor, where her mother sat with her needlework, pointedly not looking up. The rain had increased to a steady downpour, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. 6:15. Emily stood by the window, watching the street. A few people hurried past, heads down against the rain, but no one stopped. 5 minutes to 6. Her mother's needlework clicked rhythmically, each stitch a small judgment. 6 o'clock. The grandfather clock chimed, each note falling like a stone into Emily's chest. She waited, barely breathing. 1 minute passed. 2. 3. "I told you," her mother said quietly, not unkindly. "Men like that—" A knock at the door cut her off. 3 firm raps that seemed to echo through the entire house. Emily's heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. She moved toward the door, but her mother stood abruptly. "I'll answer it," she said firmly. Emily followed her to the foyer, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her mother opened the door, and there stood Daniel Barrett, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, his coat dark with water. But he was there. He'd come. "Mrs. Carter," he said politely, removing his hat, "I'm here to call on Miss Emily, if she's willing to see me." Emily's mother stood frozen for a moment, clearly having expected him not to show. "Mr. Barrett, surely you don't expect to take my daughter out in this weather?" "The rain's letting up," Daniel said, though it clearly wasn't, "and the Millers have a good solid barn. We'll be dry once we're there." His eyes found Emily over her mother's shoulder. "Miss Emily, would you do me the honor?" Emily stepped forward, reaching for her cloak on the hook by the door. "Yes," she said simply. "Emily," her mother warned. "I'll be home by midnight, Mother." Emily wrapped the cloak around her shoulders, pulling the hood up against the rain. Daniel offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him even through the wet coat. Her mother stood in the doorway, watching as Daniel helped Emily into a covered buggy, hid waiting at the gate. The horse stamped impatiently, eager to be moving. As Daniel climbed up beside her and took the reins, Emily caught a glimpse of curtains twitching in windows all along the street. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Emily Carter had gone off with the stranger in the rain. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked quietly, not yet urging the horse forward. "Once we leave, there's no taking back the gossip that'll follow." Emily thought about Lydia's letter, about her mother's fears, about Mrs. Thornton's whispers. Then she thought about 23 years of being invisible, 23 years of accepting whatever crumbs life offered, 23 years of reading about other people's adventures while never having any of her own. "I'm sure," she said. Daniel smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. "Then let's give them something worth gossiping about." He clicked to the horse, and they rolled forward into the rain and the gathering dusk, leaving the safe, predictable world of Silver Ridge behind. Emily didn't look back at her mother standing in the doorway. She looked forward, into the storm, into the unknown, into whatever came next. The road to the Millers' farm was muddy and treacherous, the buggy sliding occasionally in the ruts. But Daniel handled the reins with steady confidence, navigating the worst of it with the skill of someone used to traveling rough terrain. "You came," Emily said after they'd gone about a mile in silence. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "The rain. I thought it would give you an excuse to reconsider." Daniel glanced at her, his expression serious. "Emily, I've crossed mountains in blizzards and deserts in drought. A little rain wasn't going to keep me from you." The simple certainty in his voice made her breath catch. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He guided the horse around a particularly deep puddle. "Tell me something I don't know." "Tell me about the books you read when no one's watching." And so she did. As they drove through the rain, Emily found herself talking about books she'd never admitted to reading, not just the approved novels for young ladies, but philosophy and science and travel narratives. Books she ordered specially from Denver and hid under her bed, books that made her mother frown and her father shake his head. "I read Mary Wollstonecraft," she admitted, "A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Have you heard of it?" "Can't say I have. What does she vindicate?" "The radical idea that women might have minds worth educating and lives worth living beyond just being wives and mothers." Emily waited for the shock, the disapproval, the careful distance that usually followed such admissions. Instead, Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Seems logical enough. I've known plenty of stupid men and brilliant women. Don't see what having a particular set of parts has to do with the quality of your mind." Emily stared at him. Most men would find that opinion scandalous. Most men are scared of women who think. Makes it harder to convince them to settle for less than they deserve. He glanced at her again. "What else do you read?" She told him about Darwin and his theories of evolution, about travel journals from Africa and Asia, about astronomical treatises that suggested the universe was vaster than anyone imagined. With each confession, she expected to find the limit of his acceptance, the point where he'd realize she was too strange, too unfeminine, too much. But he just kept asking questions, genuine questions that showed he was actually listening, actually thinking about what she said. "You should write," he said suddenly. "Write?" Your own books, travel narratives maybe, or philosophical essays. You have thoughts worth sharing, Emily, ideas that deserve to be heard. Women don't, she began automatically, then stopped. Women don't what? Mary Wollstonecraft did. Other women do. Why not Emily Carter? Before she could respond, they crested a hill and the miller's barn came into view, golden light spilling from its doors and windows like honey. Despite the rain, buggies and horses filled the yard, and the sound of fiddle music drifted through the air. Daniel pulled up near the barn, jumping down to help Emily descend. His hands were warm and steady on her waist as he lifted her down, holding her just a moment longer than necessary. "Ready?" he asked. Emily looked at the barn, at the couples visible through the doorway, spinning and laughing. She thought of all the dances she'd watched from the sidelines, all the times she'd been the one holding other people's wraps while they had fun. "Ready," she said. The inside of the barn had been transformed. Lanterns hung from the rafters, hay bales lined the walls for seating, and a makeshift stage held 3 musicians, a fiddler, a guitarist, and someone with an accordion. The floor was crowded with dancers, farmers, and shopkeepers, and ranch hands all mixed together in a democracy of movement that would never exist at the formal dances in town. Several heads turned when Emily and Daniel entered, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Emily recognized many faces: Tom Mills from the feed store, Sarah Jenkins, who worked at the boarding house, old Mr. Grayson, who ran the livery stable. Their expressions ranged from surprised to curious to scandalized. "Let them look," Daniel murmured in her ear. Then louder, "Come on, let's dance." He led her onto the floor just as the musicians struck up a lively reel. This wasn't the careful, prescribed dancing of the wedding reception. This was wild and free and joyous, couples spinning until they were dizzy, laughing when they missed steps, creating their own patterns when they forgot the proper ones. Daniel was a surprisingly good dancer, leading her through the steps with a confidence that belied his rough appearance. When Emily stumbled, he caught her, spinning her mistake into a new move that made her laugh. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like this, freely and without calculation. "You're different," he said during a slower song, holding her closer than was strictly proper. "From the wedding. You're letting yourself actually be here. Is that good?" "It's perfect." His hand tightened on her waist. "This is who you really are, isn't it? Not the shadow at the wedding, but this, alive and laughing and present." Emily thought about it as they swayed together. "I don't know who I really am. I've spent so long being what everyone else needed me to be. Then maybe it's time to find out." They danced for hours, stopping only when Emily needed water or air. During one break, they stood outside the barn, the rain having finally stopped, stars beginning to peek through the breaking clouds. "Tell me about the wilderness," Emily said. "The places you've been." Daniel leaned against the barn wall, his expression distant. "I've seen mountains that touch the sky, so tall you can't breathe at the top. Deserts that go on forever, nothing but sand and sun and silence. Forests so thick and old you'd swear they were from another world." He paused. "But the most beautiful thing I've seen is the moment when someone realizes they're capable of more than they thought. I've guided plenty of people through the wilderness, Emily. Rich men from back east who want to play at being adventurers, society ladies who want to say they've seen the frontier. But every once in a while, someone surprises themselves. They find strength they didn't know they had, courage they never had to use before." "And you think I'm one of those people?" He turned to look at her fully. "I think you've been surviving in your own kind of wilderness your whole life. The difference is, you've been doing it alone." Before Emily could respond, the fiddle struck up again, and someone called for dancers for the Virginia reel. Daniel offered his hand with a grin. "Shall we scandalize them some more?" They danced until Emily's feet ached and her hair came completely undone from its careful pins. She danced with others too. Tom Mills spun her through a quadrille while regaling her with stories about his grandfather's farm, and even old Mr. Grayson claimed her for a waltz, moving with surprising grace for his 70 years. But always, she came back to Daniel. Always his eyes found hers across the crowded floor. Always his hand was there when she needed steadying, his smile when she needed encouragement. As midnight approached, Emily knew they had to leave. She could push boundaries, but staying out past midnight would move her from scandalous to ruined in the eyes of Silver Ridge society. The ride back was quieter, both of them lost in thought. The clouds had cleared completely, and the moon turned the wet landscape into something magical, all silver and shadow. "I want to see you again," Daniel said as they neared town. "People will talk." "They're already talking." "Might as well give them something interesting to say." Emily considered this. "My mother will make my life miserable." "Will she make it more miserable than it already was?" It was a fair point. "When?" "Tomorrow, after church. We'll go for a walk, very proper and respectable. And then Monday, maybe a picnic by the creek. Tuesday, you can show me your favorite reading spot. Wednesday." "You're planning our whole week?" Emily laughed. "I'm planning our whole month," Daniel corrected. "Judge Walker's survey will take at least that long. I intend to spend every free moment convincing you that you're worth seeing, worth knowing, worth choosing first." They'd reached Emily's house. The windows were dark except for a single lamp in the parlor, her mother waiting up. Daniel helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering on her waist. "Thank you," Emily said softly, "for tonight. For seeing me when everyone else looks through me." "Emily." He tucked a strand of her wayward hair behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. "You were never invisible. You were just surrounded by people who were too blind to see." For a moment they stood there in the moonlight, close enough that Emily could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could smell that scent of leather and pine that clung to him. She thought he might kiss her, and she thought she might let him, propriety be damned. But then the front door opened, lamplight spilling onto the porch, and her mother's silhouette appeared. "Sunday," Daniel said, stepping back. "After church." "After church," Emily agreed. She walked to the door on unsteady legs, feeling like she'd aged years in a single night, or perhaps finally grown into the person she was meant to be. Her mother said nothing as she entered, just looked at her with an expression Emily couldn't read. Disappointment? Resignation? Perhaps even a touch of envy. "Was it worth it?" her mother finally asked as Emily headed for the stairs. Emily paused, thinking of the dancing, the laughter, the conversations about books and ideas and dreams. Thinking of Daniel's hand steady on her waist, his voice telling her she was worth choosing first. "Yes," she said simply. "It was worth everything." She climbed the stairs to her room, not bothering to light a lamp. In the darkness, she unpinned what was left of her hairstyle, letting her hair fall loose around her shoulders. Through her window, she could see Daniel's buggy disappearing down the street, and she watched until it turned the corner and vanished from view. Tomorrow there would be consequences. Tomorrow there would be gossip and sermons and her mother's cold silence. Tomorrow the real test would begin. Whether she had the courage to keep choosing this path when the whole town was watching and judging. But tonight, for the first time in her life, Emily Carter had been the heroine of her own story instead of a supporting character in someone else's. She danced until her feet hurt and laughed until her cheeks ached and talked about books with someone who actually listened. She'd been seen, really seen, and found worthy of pursuit. She pulled out Jane Eyre again, finding the passage she'd marked with the wildflower from Lydia's wedding. But this time different words caught her eye, a few pages later. "I am not an angel, and I will not be one till I die. I will be myself." Emily pressed the flower back between the pages and set the book aside. Tomorrow she would be tested, but tonight she would sleep with the memory of music in her ears and the ghost of Daniel's touch on her waist, and dream of all the wild, impossible things that might come next. Sunday morning arrived with a brilliance that seemed to mock the storm of gossip brewing in Silver Ridge. Emily woke to find her green dress from the night before still draped over her chair, mud staining the hem like evidence of a crime. She could hear her parents moving about downstairs, the clink of dishes and the low murmur of voices that stopped abruptly when her footsteps creaked on the landing. The breakfast table was a study in tension. Her father kept his eyes fixed on his newspaper, though Emily noticed he hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. Her mother served the porridge with movements so precise they seemed violent, each spoonful dropping into bowls with deliberate force. "I trust you slept well," her mother said, the words sharp as winter frost. "Very well," Thank you, Emily replied, matching her mother's formal tone. The Thorntons have invited us for Sunday dinner, her father said suddenly, still not looking up from his paper. All of us. They were quite insistent. Emily understood immediately. The Thorntons wanted a front row seat to the drama, to observe the Carter family's shame up close. Mrs. Thornton would prod and pry with her false concern, trying to extract every sordid detail of Emily's evening. I'm afraid I have other plans for after church, Emily said calmly, spreading butter on her toast. The newspaper rustled violently. Other plans? Mr. Barrett asked to call on me. A walk, nothing improper. Her mother's spoon clattered into her bowl. Absolutely not. You've already done enough damage to this family's reputation. I won't have you parading around town with that man like some common... Like some common what, Mother? Emily's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Say it. Like some common woman who makes her own choices? Like a fool, her father said quietly, finally meeting her eyes. Emily, you're my daughter, and I love you, but you're being a fool. This man will be gone in a month, and you'll be left here with a ruined reputation and no prospects. I already have no prospects, Father. Or have you forgotten that before last night, the last man to show any interest in me was Mr. Whitmore, and that was only because he needs someone to mother his children and manage his house? That's not true, her mother protested weakly. Isn't it? Name one man in this town who's shown genuine interest in me. Not in Lydia's sister, not in a convenient wife, but in me. The silence stretched until it became painful. Emily stood, leaving her breakfast mostly untouched. I'm going to get ready for church. And afterward, I'm going walking with Mr. Barrett. You can either accept it or not, but you can't stop me. I'm 23 years old, not 13. She left them sitting there, her father's newspaper forgotten, her mother's face pale with shock. As she climbed the stairs, she heard her mother whisper, "What's happened to her?" What had happened to her? Emily wondered as she dressed for church in her most modest gray dress, hoping to offset the scandal with an appearance of propriety. She'd tasted freedom, that's what had happened. She'd felt what it was like to be chosen, to be seen, to matter. And now that she knew such things were possible, she couldn't unknow them. The walk to church felt like walking to her own execution. Curtains twitched as they passed, faces appeared and disappeared in windows, and Emily could practically feel the weight of eyes following their small family procession. Her mother walked with her chin high, affecting an air of unconcern that fooled no one. Her father seemed to have shrunk into himself, his shoulders hunched as if against a physical blow. At the church steps, they were immediately surrounded. Mrs. Thornton materialized as if from thin air, her eyes glittering with malicious curiosity. "Margaret, dear, how are you holding up?" She grasped Emily's mother's hands with theatrical concern. Such a trying time. Young girls can be so rebellious. "We're perfectly fine, thank you," Emily's mother managed. Of course. Though I must say, everyone's talking about it. That Barrett fellow dancing until all hours, and in such weather." Mrs. Thornton's gaze slid to Emily. "My dear girl, whatever were you thinking?" "I was thinking that I wanted to dance," Emily said simply. "Is that so terrible?" Mrs. Thornton's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Before she could recover, more people pressed in with their questions and comments disguised as concern. Emily endured it all with a calm that surprised her, answering their prying with polite but firm responses that gave away nothing. Inside the church, the whispers followed them to their pew. Emily kept her eyes forward, her hands folded in her lap, but she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her from all sides. When Reverend Matthews took the pulpit, she braced herself. The sermon was about temptation and the weakness of the flesh, about how Satan came in pleasing forms to lead the righteous astray, about the importance of young women maintaining their virtue and reputation. Every word felt aimed directly at Emily, and she could feel the congregation's attention boring into the back of her head. Halfway through, the church door opened. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, steady and unhurried. Emily didn't have to turn to know who it was. She could tell by the collective intake of breath from the congregation. Daniel Barrett walked up the center aisle with the confidence of someone who belonged there, his hat in his hand, his best clothes clean but still marking him as different from the town's merchants and clerks. He nodded politely to Reverend Matthews, who had stopped mid-sentence and took a seat in an empty pew 3 rows behind the Carters. The Reverend stumbled over his next words, clearly thrown by this unexpected development. The sermon continued, but the fire had gone out of it. Everyone was too busy stealing glances at Daniel, who sat with perfect attention, as if he attended this church every Sunday. When the service ended, Emily turned to find Daniel already standing, waiting. He looked different in the daylight streaming through the church windows, less mysterious, more solid and real. Their eyes met across the space, and he smiled slightly, a private communication that made her pulse quicken. "Miss Carter," he said formally as her family filed past. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, beautiful service." Emily's father grunted something non-committal. Her mother said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. But Daniel seemed unperturbed by their coldness. "Miss Emily, would you still honor me with that walk?" Before Emily could answer, Judge Walker appeared, Thomas's father, his presence commanding immediate attention. The crowd parted for him as he approached Daniel. "Barrett," he said curtly, "I need to speak with you about the survey. Tomorrow morning, early." "Of course, Judge," Daniel replied easily. "I'll have my preliminary report ready." Judge Walker's gaze shifted to Emily, and his expression hardened. "Miss Carter, I heard you attended the Miller's dance last evening." "I did," Emily said, lifting her chin. "Interesting choice." His tone suggested it was anything but. "I would have thought a young lady of good family would be more, selective in her associations." Daniel stepped forward slightly, not quite blocking Emily, but positioning himself beside her. "With respect, Judge Walker, I'd say Miss Carter showed excellent judgment. The Millers are good people, and their hospitality is genuine. Can't say the same for everyone in town." The judge's face darkened. "Careful, Barrett. You work for me." "For another 3 weeks," Daniel agreed, "and I'll do the job you hired me for. But that doesn't give you or anyone else the right to insult Miss Carter in my presence." The tension crackled between them. The entire congregation seemed to hold its breath. Then Judge Walker smiled, cold and sharp. 3 weeks, he repeated. "Yes, that's about right. And then you'll move on to the next job, the next town. Men like you always do." His gaze returned to Emily. "Something for certain young ladies to keep in mind." He walked away, leaving silence in his wake. Emily felt the sting of his words, the truth in them that she couldn't deny. 3 weeks. That's all she had. "Shall we go?" Daniel asked quietly, offering his arm. Emily took it, ignoring the gasps and whispers that followed them out of the church. They walked in silence for a while, heading toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of town. The sun was warm on Emily's face, the air sweet with the scent of wildflowers that had bloomed overnight after the rain. "He's right, isn't he?" Emily finally said. "You will leave." Daniel didn't answer immediately. They'd reached the creek, and he guided her to a fallen log that served as a natural bench. The water gurgled peacefully, Sunday quiet settling over the landscape. "I have to finish the survey," he said finally. "And after that? Yes, there's another job waiting." "There always is." Emily nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. "Where?" "Wyoming territory. The railroad's pushing through, and they need scouts to find the best routes." "That sounds exciting." She managed to keep her voice level. "New territories, new adventures." "Emily." He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "I'm not Thomas Walker. I can't offer you a fine house on Maple Street or a place in society. I can't give you the kind of life your sister has." "I don't want my sister's life," Emily said firmly. "I've seen what that kind of security costs." "But what do you want? Really want, not just what you don't want." Emily looked at their joined hands, his so large and weathered, hers small and ink-stained. "I want to matter. I want to wake up each day knowing I chose my life instead of having it chosen for me. I want conversations that challenge me and experiences that change me. I want." She paused, gathering courage. "I want to see those mountains that touch the sky. Those deserts that go on forever." Daniel's hands tightened on hers. Those aren't places for a lady. The frontier is rough, dangerous. There's no society, no comfort, no guarantee of anything except hardship. And Silver Ridge offers me what? Comfort in my invisibility? Safety in my predictability? A guarantee that I'll die having lived exactly the life everyone expected of me? You don't know what you're saying. You've never been hungry, really hungry. Never been so cold you couldn't feel your fingers, or so hot you thought you'd die of thirst. Never had to worry about Indian raids or bandits or mountain lions. You're right, Emily agreed. I don't know those things. But I know what it's like to be so numb inside that physical discomfort would be a relief. I know what it's like to be so starved for real connection that even danger sounds better than another day of emptiness. Daniel released her hands and stood, pacing to the edge of the creek. You're romanticizing it. The frontier isn't some grand adventure from your books. It's harsh and unforgiving, and it breaks people. And Silver Ridge doesn't? Emily stood too, anger flaring. Look at my mother, broken by years of trying to maintain respectability we can't afford. Look at my father, broken by failure and debt. Look at Lydia, already breaking under the weight of a marriage that's more business than love. That's different, is it? At least on the frontier, the things that break you are honest. A storm, a mountain, a river. They don't care about your reputation or your family name. They judge you on your strength and wit and will to survive. Daniel turned back to her, his expression unreadable. You've thought about this. I've thought about it every day since you asked me to dance. Maybe even before that. Maybe I've been thinking about it my whole life. I just didn't have words for it until now. They stood there facing each other across a distance that felt like miles, despite being only a few feet. Then Daniel laughed, short and surprised. God help me, you're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a skittish horse. Emily, even if I wanted to take you with me, which would be insane, your family would never allow it. The whole town already thinks I'm ruined. My family already thinks I'm a fool. What else can they do to me? They could have me arrested. Kidnapping, corruption of a minor. I'm 23, not a minor, and it wouldn't be kidnapping if I chose to go. Daniel stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You're talking about throwing away everything. Your home, your family, any chance at a normal life. I'm talking about choosing an abnormal life, my own life. Emily reached up, her fingers barely brushing his jaw. With you. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. This is madness. Maybe, but it's my madness to choose. For a long moment they stayed frozen like that, her hand against his face, his eyes searching hers for something. Doubt, fear, regret, anything that would give him an excuse to be noble and walk away. But Emily let him see everything. Her determination, her desire, her complete certainty that this was right even if it was crazy. 3 weeks, he said finally. That's how long we have to figure this out. Then we'd better not waste any time. He smiled then, that genuine smile that transformed his face. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? I certainly hope so. He was still holding her hand against his cheek when they heard voices approaching. They stepped apart quickly, but not quickly enough. Mrs. Thornton appeared around the bend in the path, accompanied by her daughter Prudence and 2 other ladies from church. Well, Mrs. Thornton said, her voice dripping with scandalized delight. This is cozy. Good afternoon, Mrs. Thornton, Emily said calmly. Lovely day for a walk? Indeed. Though most young ladies would have a chaperone for such walks, her eyes glittered with malice. But then you've already shown a shocking disregard for propriety, haven't you? Have I? Emily asked innocently. I must have missed the impropriety. Mr. Barrett and I were simply enjoying nature and discussing literature. Did you know he's read Darwin? Such fascinating theories about adaptation and survival. Mrs. Thornton's face went red. Darwin, that godless man with his blasphemous ideas? Blasphemous? I thought they were scientific, but then I suppose not everyone has the education to understand the difference. Prudence gasped. Mrs. Thornton swelled with indignation. How dare you? Ladies, Daniel interrupted smoothly, perhaps we should continue this fascinating theological debate another time. Miss Carter and I were just heading back to town. He offered Emily his arm, and they walked past the sputtering women with perfect composure. Once they were out of earshot, Emily let out a shaky breath. That was either very brave or very stupid, Daniel said. Probably both, but did you see her face when I mentioned Darwin? You're going to make these 3 weeks interesting, aren't you? I'm going to make them count. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking, talking, planning. Daniel told her more about Wyoming territory, about the challenges and opportunities there. Emily told him about her dreams of writing, of documenting the frontier experience from a woman's perspective. There's a newspaper in Cheyenne, Daniel said thoughtfully. They might take submissions from a correspondent, especially one writing about subjects others won't touch. A female correspondent? They wouldn't have to know you're female. You could use a pen name. Emily's heart raced at the possibility. E.A. Carter. Ambiguous enough. Or something completely different. Start fresh. Start fresh. The idea was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Daniel walked her home. They could see her parents through the parlor window, sitting rigid as statues. Emily knew what awaited her inside: lectures, threats, possibly even ultimatums. Tomorrow? Daniel asked. Tomorrow, Emily confirmed, and the day after, and the day after that. Your family. Let me handle my family. He looked skeptical, but didn't argue. Emily, we need to be careful. Judge Walker wasn't making idle threats. If he thinks I'm corrupting you or damaging his family's reputation by association, he could make things difficult. More difficult than they already are? Yes. His expression was serious. He has power in this town. He could have me run out or arrested on trumped-up charges. He could make things very hard for your family. Emily considered this. Then we'll have to be clever about it. What did you have in mind? She smiled. What if we gave them what they expect? Let them see me walking with you, very proper, very public. Meanwhile, we make our real plans in private. Letters, perhaps, or meetings in places they wouldn't expect. Devious. I like it. I've had 23 years to learn how to be invisible when it suits me. Might as well put that skill to use. Daniel laughed. All right, Miss Carter. We'll play their game during the day. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. But the nights are ours. The promise in his words sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. Inside the house, the confrontation was exactly what Emily expected. Her parents were waiting in the parlor, their faces set in identical expressions of disapproval. Sit down, her father commanded. Emily sat, her back straight, her hands folded. She'd learned long ago that appearing calm during these lectures made them shorter. This has to stop, her mother began. The whole town is talking. Mrs. Thornton said she found you in a compromising position by the creek. We were standing 3 feet apart having a conversation about literature, Emily said evenly. If that's compromising, then Mrs. Thornton has a more vivid imagination than I gave her credit for. Don't be flippant, her father snapped. This is serious, Emily. Your reputation is already ruined according to everyone. So what does it matter? It matters because you still have to live in this town after he leaves, her mother said, and for the first time Emily heard real fear in her voice. When he's gone, you'll still be here, and everyone will remember. No man will marry you. You'll be a spinster, dependent on us or Lydia's charity for the rest of your life. Maybe I won't be here, Emily said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. What do you mean? Her father asked, his voice dangerously low. I mean, maybe I'll leave too. Maybe I'll go somewhere where no one knows me, where I can start over. With him? Her mother's voice rose to near hysteria. You'd run away with a man you've known for less than a week? I'd run away with my own life, Mother. He's just showing me that it's possible. This is insane, her father said. Emily, you're not thinking clearly. This man has filled your head with romantic notions. No, Emily interrupted. Books filled my head with romantic notions. Life in this town beat them out of me. Daniel just reminded me that there's a world beyond Silver Ridge where women can be more than wives and mothers and sisters. Those women end up alone and destitute, her mother said harshly. Is that what you want? Maybe. If the alternative is ending up like… Emily stopped herself, but too late. Like me? Her mother finished, her voice cold. Is that what you were going to say? Emily met her mother's eyes. Aren't you tired, Mother? Tired of pretending we're more than we are? Tired of scraping for respectability that will always be just out of reach? Tired of living for what other people think instead of what we feel? Her mother's face crumpled for just a moment, showing a flash of something raw and painful. Then the mask slammed back into place. Go to your room, she said quietly. You're not to leave this house except for church until that man is gone from town. Emily stood slowly. You can lock me in my room, Mother, but you can't lock up my mind. And you can't stop me from choosing my own life. She climbed the stairs to her room, listening as her parents' voices rose and fell in heated discussion below. Outside her window, the moon was rising, full and bright. Somewhere in town, Daniel was probably in his boarding house room, perhaps thinking of her as she was thinking of him. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to plan, to prepare, to decide if she was brave enough to jump off the cliff she was standing on. Emily pulled out paper and pen, thinking. If she was going to do this, really do this, she needed to be smart about it. She needed money of her own, plans for what came next, some way to support herself if things went wrong. She began to write. Not a letter, but a list. Things to sell. Her grandmother's brooch, the few good dresses that were truly hers, the books she couldn't take with her, skills she had that might earn money. Her education was better than most. She could teach, write, keep books for a business. Places Daniel had mentioned where they needed workers, teachers, anyone willing to brave the frontier. As she wrote, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the vague someday hope of her youth, but real concrete hope with dates and plans and possibilities. A pebble hit her window, then another. Emily rose, her heart pounding, and looked out. Daniel stood in the garden below, barely visible in the shadows. She opened the window carefully, mindful of the squeaky hinge. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. Probably not, he agreed, his voice carrying up to her. But I had to tell you something. What? Even in the moonlight, she could see his smile. I sent a telegram to a friend in Cheyenne, asked about opportunities for an educated woman who can write. Emily's breath caught. And? He says the newspaper would be interested. They need someone to write about the social aspects of frontier life, the women's perspective. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. A start. A real possibility. A future that could be hers. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long way to go before this is real. He paused. Your parents. They've forbidden me to leave the house except for church. Will you obey? Emily smiled. What do you think? He laughed softly. I think Emily Carter is done with obedience. You might be right. Tomorrow night, he said, after your parents are asleep. The old oak tree by the schoolhouse. I'll be there. He disappeared into the shadows, and Emily closed the window. She returned to her list, her plans, her wild and impossible dreams that were somehow impossibly becoming possible. 3 weeks. It wasn't much time, but it was more than she'd ever had before. 3 weeks to change her life completely, to step out of her sister's shadow and into her own light. Emily Carter was done being invisible. She was ready to be seen, to be chosen, to choose herself. And if that made her a scandal, a cautionary tale, a disappointment to everyone who'd tried to keep her small and safe and quiet, so be it. She had mountains to climb and deserts to cross and stories to write. She had a life to live, her own life, finally, fully her own. And she could hardly wait to begin. The old oak tree by the schoolhouse stood like a sentinel in the darkness, its massive branches creating a canopy of shadows. Emily's heart pounded as she slipped through the silent streets, every footstep seeming to echo like thunder in the midnight quiet. She'd waited until she heard her father's snoring and her mother's restless movements had finally stilled before creeping down the stairs, avoiding the third step that creaked and the loose floorboard near the door. Daniel was already there, a darker shadow against the tree trunk. When he saw her, he stepped forward into a patch of moonlight, and Emily's breath caught at the relief in his expression. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "I told you I would." She moved closer, aware that they were truly alone for the first time. No crowds, no watchful eyes, just them and the night. "Though, if we're caught, we won't be caught. I've been watching the patterns. The sheriff makes his rounds at 11 and 2. We have time." They sat beneath the oak tree, close enough that Emily could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The night was cool, autumn creeping in despite the lingering summer days, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Tell me about Wyoming," she said softly. "Tell me what I'd be getting myself into." Daniel was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Cheyenne's rough. It's not like the established towns back east or even like Silver Ridge. It's growing fast, too fast maybe. There's opportunity there, but there's also danger. Saloons outnumber churches 10 to 1. Law is whatever the strongest man says it is, though that's changing slowly. You're trying to scare me away. I'm trying to be honest with you. Emily, you've lived your whole life in a place where the worst thing that happens is gossip and social snubs. In Cheyenne, women get robbed, assaulted, worse. The frontier doesn't care that you're educated or well-bred. But there are women there. Families? Yes. More arriving every day. They're building schools, churches, trying to bring civilization to the wilderness. And they need teachers, writers, people who can help build something from nothing. He turned to look at her directly. You'd have purpose there, real purpose. Not just keeping house and raising children, but helping to shape what the West becomes. Emily felt something stir in her chest, a yearning so powerful it was almost painful. And us? What would we be? Daniel reached out, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced circles on her palm, and Emily shivered at the intimacy of it. I won't lie to you and promise marriage right away. I can't afford a wife, not yet, but I'm working on something. There's land available, good land for those willing to claim it and work it. I could build something there, something real, and then I'd marry you proper. Give you the respectability you deserve along with the freedom you crave. I don't need respectability if I have freedom. You say that now, but you've never been without it. Trust me, Emily. Being a woman alone on the frontier without the protection of marriage or family, it's dangerous. Emily squeezed his hand. Then I guess you'd better protect me until you can marry me. He pulled her closer, and suddenly she was in his arms, her head against his chest where she could hear his heart beating fast and strong. You're determined to do this, aren't you? To throw everything away for an uncertain future with a man you barely know? I know enough, Emily said, echoing his words from days ago. I know you see me as I really am. I know you value my thoughts and dreams. I know that when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I've felt in 23 years. She pulled back to look at him. What else do I need to know? He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. You need to know that I'm falling in love with you, Emily Carter. God help me, but I am. And that terrifies me more than any mountain or desert ever has. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Why does it terrify you? Because I've never had anything to lose before. Never had anyone who could destroy me by walking away. But you could. You already could. Then I guess we're even, Emily whispered. Because you could destroy me, too. He kissed her then, soft and careful at first, as if she might break or disappear. Emily had never been kissed before, had only read about it in books, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The warmth of his lips, the gentle pressure, the way the world seemed to narrow down to just this moment, just this connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing unsteadily. Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face. We need a plan, he said. A real plan, not just dreams and wishes. Emily nodded, trying to focus, despite the lingering sensation of his kiss. I've been thinking about that. I have some money saved, not much, but enough for travel. And my grandmother's jewelry. I could sell it in Denver or Cheyenne. I have money saved too, enough to get us started, maybe put a down payment on some land. But Emily, once we leave, there's no coming back. Your family will disown you. Society will condemn you. Are you prepared for that? My family barely owns me now, Emily said with bitter honesty. And society has already condemned me. What's the difference between being a scandal in Silver Ridge and being nobody in Cheyenne? The difference is choice. Here you're a scandal because you danced with me. There, you'd be choosing to live outside the bounds of propriety until we can marry. That's a different kind of judgment. I understand. Emily stood, pacing a few steps away, trying to organize her thoughts. What about Judge Walker? He's already suspicious. Daniel's expression darkened. He's more than suspicious. He warned me today to stay away from you. Said if he caught us together again, he'd find a reason to have me arrested. Fear shot through Emily. He can't do that. You haven't broken any laws. Men like Judge Walker don't need real laws. They make their own. Daniel stood too, moving to her side. Which is why we need to be more careful. And why we might need to leave sooner than planned. How soon? I can finish the essential parts of the survey in a week, maybe 10 days. I'll tell the judge I need to check some boundaries further north, buy us a few days head start before anyone realizes we're gone. A week. The timeline had suddenly compressed from 3 weeks to 1. Emily's mind raced, calculating everything she'd need to do, everything she'd need to say goodbye to. My sister comes back from Denver on Friday, she said. I'd like to see her once more before you disappear from her life forever? Emily flinched at the harsh truth of it. Yes. That's 4 days from now. Can you pretend everything is normal for 4 more days? I've been pretending my whole life. What's 4 more days? But her voice caught on the words. The reality was setting in now. She would leave everything behind. Her parents, who despite their flaws, loved her in their limited way. Her sister, who she'd shared a room with for 18 years. The town she'd grown up in, the familiar faces, the known patterns of life. Hey, Daniel pulled her back into his arms. We don't have to do this. You can stay, find a proper husband eventually, have the life you're supposed to have. No. Emily's voice was firm. I can't. Not anymore. Not after knowing what else is possible. She looked up at him. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Anything. Are you asking me to come with you because you truly want me, or because you feel responsible for ruining my reputation? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Emily's heart sank. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. The first time I saw you at that wedding, holding those wildflowers while everyone else had roses, I thought you were the most real thing I'd ever seen. When we danced, when you told me about your books and your dreams, I knew I was in trouble. And every moment since has just confirmed what I knew that first night. You're extraordinary, Emily. Not because you're rebelling against your life here, but because of who you are at your core. Your intelligence, your courage, your refusal to accept less than you deserve even when the whole world is telling you to be grateful for scraps. He paused, his hands moving to grip her shoulders. I'm not asking you to come with me out of obligation. I'm asking because the thought of leaving you behind, of never seeing you again, of you marrying some fool who doesn't appreciate what he has, it makes me want to burn this whole town down. I'm asking because I'm selfish, and I want you with me, beside me, for as long as you'll have me. Emily reached up and kissed him, pouring all her answer into the touch. When they broke apart, she was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. Yes to the danger and uncertainty and impropriety. Yes to you. They stayed there for another hour, planning in whispers. Daniel would send another telegram tomorrow, arranging for a place for them to stay in Cheyenne. Emily would slowly pack her essential belongings, hiding them piece by piece. They would meet again in 2 nights to finalize everything. As Emily crept back through the dark streets toward home, she felt as if she were walking between 2 worlds, the one she'd always known and the one waiting for her. The house was still quiet when she slipped inside, but as she reached the top of the stairs, a voice stopped her. I know where you've been. Emily turned to find her mother standing in her bedroom doorway, a candle in her hand casting shadows across her face. Mother, Don't lie to me, Emily. I followed you. I saw you with him. Emily's heart stopped. This was it, the end of everything before it could begin. Her mother would wake her father. They'd lock her in her room, send word to Judge Walker. But her mother just stood there, looking older and more tired than Emily had ever seen her. "Do you love him?" she asked quietly. The question was so unexpected that Emily couldn't immediately answer. Her mother moved closer, setting the candle on the hall table. "I asked if you love him." I think so, yes." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I was in love once. Before your father." Emily's world tilted. "What?" "His name was William. He was a surveyor, like your Mr. Barrett. Came through town when I was 19, stayed for 6 weeks mapping the territory. He asked me to go with him to California." Her mother's voice was distant, lost in memory. "I said no. My parents would have been devastated. Society would have shunned me. So I stayed, and I married your father because he was suitable and stable and safe." "Mother, I'm not telling you this to give you permission. I'm telling you because you should know what both choices cost." Her mother moved past Emily toward her own room. "William wrote to me once, 5 years later. He'd struck gold in California, built a fortune. He married a woman who'd traveled there alone, a scandalous woman who'd left her family behind for adventure. They seemed happy." She paused at her doorway. "I've been a good wife to your father. I've raised 2 daughters, maintained a respectable home. I've done everything I was supposed to do. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder who I would have been if I'd been brave enough to say yes. Why are you telling me this now?" Her mother turned, and in the candlelight, Emily could see tears on her cheeks. "Because you're braver than I was. And because if you're going to go, you should go knowing that someone understands why." "You won't stop me." "Could I?" "You're not me, Emily. You've always been different, stronger maybe, or maybe just more foolish. But you're my daughter, and I want you to be happy, even if that happiness takes you away from me." Emily crossed the hall and embraced her mother, both of them crying now. They stood there in the dark hallway, holding each other in a way they hadn't since Emily was small. "Your father can't know," her mother finally whispered. "He wouldn't understand. He'd try to stop you, and it would destroy him when he failed. How will you explain, 'I'll think of something'? You wouldn't be the first daughter to disappear in shame after a scandal. People will believe what they want to believe." Her mother pulled back, studying Emily's face. "When?" "Soon. Less than a week." Her mother nodded slowly. "Then we don't have much time." She moved into her room and returned with a small cloth bag. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me when I married, said it was for emergencies." Emily opened the bag and gasped. Inside were several gold coins and a pair of pearl earrings she'd never seen before. "Mother, I can't." "You can, and you will. It's not much, but it might make the difference between comfort and desperation." Her mother pressed the bag into Emily's hands. "Promise me you'll write when you're settled. Not here, that would cause too much trouble. But maybe to your Aunt Catherine in Boston. She'll forward letters without asking questions. I promise." "And Emily," her mother's voice was firm now, more like her usual self. "Don't waste this. Don't throw away your whole life for a man who doesn't deserve you. But if he does deserve you, if he truly sees you and values you and loves you, then fight for that love with everything you have." Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her mother touched her cheek gently, then retreated to her room, closing the door with quiet finality. The next 3 days passed in a strange, dreamlike state. Emily went through the motions of normal life, helping with household chores, attending a ladies' auxiliary meeting, enduring a visit from Mrs. Thornton where she pretended to be properly chastened. All the while, she was secretly preparing for her departure. She packed slowly, carefully, choosing only essentials. A few dresses, her sturdiest boots, her warmest cloak, her beloved copy of Jane Eyre, and 2 other books she couldn't bear to leave. Her writing supplies, the money from her mother, and her own meager savings sewn into the lining of her corset. She wrote letters she would never send, saying goodbye to places and people. She walked through town one last time, memorizing the church steeple, the school where she'd learned to read, the creek where Daniel had first really seen her. On Thursday afternoon, she encountered Judge Walker outside the bank. He stopped her with a cold smile. "Miss Carter, I trust you're behaving yourself these days." "Of course, Judge Walker. I've been quite confined to home, actually." "Good. Good." He leaned closer, and Emily could smell tobacco on his breath. "Your Mr. Barrett will be finishing his work soon, moving on to other territories, other adventures. I'm sure you'll be relieved to have this unpleasantness behind you." "I'm sure everyone will be relieved," Emily agreed calmly. The judge studied her for a moment, clearly suspicious of her easy acquiescence. "You're a smart girl, Emily. Too smart to throw your life away on a fantasy. Remember that." That night, Emily met Daniel again at the oak tree. He was tense, agitated in a way she hadn't seen before. "What's wrong?" "Judge Walker. He's been asking questions, following me. I think he knows something's planned." Daniel paced beneath the tree. "We might need to leave sooner. Tomorrow night, after your sister's return." "Tomorrow?" Emily's heart raced. "But we're not ready." "We're as ready as we'll ever be. I've arranged everything in Cheyenne. There's a boarding house that will take us, no questions asked. The newspaper editor is expecting you. There's even a teaching position available if the writing doesn't work out immediately." Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to be calm. "All right. Tomorrow night. Where do we meet?" "The old barn on the Henderson property, the abandoned one past the cemetery. Midnight. Can you get there?" "Yes." She moved into his arms, needing his strength. "Are you sure about this?" "About me?" He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Are you sure about me?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, determined. "Yes, I'm sure." Friday arrived with unseasonable heat, the sun beating down mercilessly. Emily helped prepare for Lydia's return, her mother watching her with eyes that held secrets and sorrow. Her father, oblivious to the undercurrents, talked about business, about the bank, about everything except what really mattered. The afternoon coach brought Lydia and Thomas back from Denver. Emily watched from the window as they descended, Thomas helping Lydia down with perfunctory politeness. Even from a distance, Emily could see something had changed in her sister. The glow of new marriage had dimmed, replaced by something harder, more resigned. The family gathered for dinner at the Walker house, a formal affair that felt more like a business meeting than a celebration. Lydia wore a new dress from Denver, expensive and fashionable, but it seemed to weigh on her like armor. She smiled and laughed at all the right moments, but Emily, who knew her better than anyone, could see the strain. After dinner, while the men discussed politics and business, Emily managed to pull Lydia aside into the garden. "How was Denver?" she asked carefully. "Oh, wonderful. So sophisticated. Thomas knows all the best places." Lydia's voice was bright, too bright. "And you? I heard about your situation." "Yes, I imagine everyone's heard." Lydia looked at her then, really looked at her, and Emily saw something unexpected in her sister's eyes. Envy. "He danced with you all night, didn't he? That man, Barrett?" "Yes." "And he sees you? Really sees you, not just as a pretty ornament or a useful connection?" Emily nodded, surprised by the questions. Lydia turned away, looking out at the perfect garden of her perfect new home. "Thomas hasn't really looked at me since our wedding night. Oh, he performs his husbandly duties, takes me to the right places, says the right things in public. But in private, it's like I'm a piece of furniture he acquired. Expensive, beautiful furniture, but furniture nonetheless." "Lydia, do you know what he said to me last night?" "He said I should be grateful. That many men wouldn't have married a girl from a family with financial difficulties, no matter how pretty she was. He did me a favor, apparently." Emily reached for her sister's hand, but Lydia pulled away. "Don't pity me. I made my choice. I wanted security, status, all the things Mother said mattered, and I have them." She straightened her shoulders. "But you, Emily, you could choose differently." "What are you saying?" Lydia turned back to her, and for a moment she looked like the sister Emily had shared secrets with as a child. "I'm saying that if you have a chance at real happiness, at real love, you should take it, whatever the cost, even if it means leaving everything behind. Especially then." Lydia gripped Emily's hand suddenly, tightly. Don't end up like me, Em. Don't wake up one day in a beautiful house with a successful husband and realize you've traded your soul for respectability. It's not too late for you. Yes, it is. I'm Mrs. Thomas Walker now. That's who I'll be until I die. She squeezed Emily's hands once more, then let go. But you're still Emily Carter. You can still choose who you become. They went back inside, and Emily knew it was goodbye, though neither of them said the word. When the evening ended and the Carters walked home, Emily looked back once at her sister standing in the doorway of the Walker house, a silhouette against the light, already becoming a stranger. At home, Emily pleaded exhaustion and retired early. She lay in bed fully dressed, listening to the house settle into sleep. At 11:30, she rose, gathered her hidden bundle of belongings, and crept downstairs. At the door, she found her mother waiting in the darkness. They didn't speak. Her mother simply pulled her into a fierce embrace, holding her as if trying to memorize the feel of her daughter in her arms. Then she pushed Emily toward the door, turning away before she could see her leave. Emily slipped out into the night, her bundle clutched against her chest, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the whole town could hear it. The streets were empty, the moon hidden behind clouds. She made her way carefully through the familiar paths that would soon be only memories. The old Henderson barn loomed against the sky, a darker shadow in the darkness. As she approached, a figure separated from the wall, Daniel, with 2 horses ready. "You came," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. "Did you doubt I would?" "Every second." He kissed her hard, desperately, as if he'd been afraid he'd never get the chance again. "We need to go." Judge Walker had men watching my boarding house. They might have followed. The sound of approaching horses cut him off. Lights appeared on the road. Torches, lanterns, moving fast toward them. "Mount up," Daniel commanded, practically throwing Emily onto one of the horses. She'd ridden before, but never astride, never in skirts. She hitched them up without regard for modesty, gripping the saddle horn as Daniel swung up onto his own horse. "Can you ride hard?" "I can try." "That's my girl." They kicked the horses into motion just as the lights crested the hill. Shouts rose behind them. Judge Walker's voice, her father's, others she couldn't identify. Daniel led them off the road immediately, plunging into the darkness of the open prairie. Emily held on desperately as her horse followed Daniel's, trusting the animal's night vision and Daniel's knowledge of the terrain. Behind them, the shouts grew fainter, but didn't disappear. They were being pursued. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, Daniel leading them through streams to break their trail, doubling back, using every trick he knew. Finally, as they climbed into the foothills, he called a halt. They sat on their horses, listening. No sounds of pursuit reached them, only the normal night noises of the wilderness. "We lost them," Daniel said, "but they'll pick up our trail come dawn. We need to keep moving, get as far as we can while it's still dark." "Where are we going?" "There's a way station about 20 miles north. We can rest there, change horses, then push on to Denver. From there, we take the train to Cheyenne." Emily nodded, though he probably couldn't see her in the darkness. "Daniel." "Yeah." "I'm terrified." She heard him move his horse closer, felt his hand find hers in the darkness. "So am I. But Emily?" "Yes." "I'm also free. For the first time in my life, I'm completely free. And so are you." As they rode on into the night, leaving Silver Ridge and everything Emily had ever known behind, she realized he was right. She was terrified, exhilarated, uncertain of everything except the man beside her. She had thrown away respectability, family, safety, all for love, and the promise of a life that was truly her own. The Emily Carter who had stood in her sister's shadow at a wedding just weeks ago would have been horrified. But that Emily was gone, left behind in a town that had never really seen her anyway. The woman riding through the darkness toward an uncertain future was someone new, someone brave, someone who chose love over safety and freedom over respectability. As the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Daniel reached over and took her hand again. "No regrets?" he asked. Emily thought of her mother's tears, her father's anger, Lydia trapped in her beautiful cage. She thought of Mrs. Thornton's gossip and Judge Walker's threats and 23 years of being invisible. "No regrets," she said firmly. Only possibilities. They rode on as the sun rose, two silhouettes against the vast Colorado sky, heading toward whatever adventures awaited them in the wild territories beyond. Behind them, Silver Ridge was waking up to scandal, to empty places where Emily should have been, to the shocking news that the quiet Carter girl had run away with the stranger. Let them talk, Emily thought. Let them shake their heads and clutch their pearls and warn their daughters about the dangers of reading too many books and dancing with unsuitable men. She had chosen her own story, and she would write it herself, 1 mile at a time, 1 day at a time, with the man who had seen her when no one else would look. The proper ending for a proper girl would have been different: reconciliation, a suitable marriage, a place in society maintained. But Emily had never really been a proper girl, had only played one out of duty and fear. Now riding toward the unknown with dawn breaking around them and Daniel's hand warm in hers, she was exactly who she was meant to be: wild, free, chosen, and choosing in return every moment, every mile, every breath. This was her story now, and she could hardly wait to see how it would unfold. The way station appeared just as Daniel had promised: a rough wooden structure, huddled against a rocky outcrop like it was trying to hide from the endless sky. Emily's legs nearly buckled when Daniel helped her dismount, her body screaming from hours of hard riding. She'd never been this far from home, never seen horizons that stretched so wide without a single familiar landmark. "You did well," Daniel said softly, steadying her with his hands on her waist. "Better than most men would have on their first real ride." The station keeper, a grizzled man with suspicious eyes, took their horses without questions after Daniel passed him what seemed like more money than necessary. Inside, the station was dim and sparse, a few rough tables, a fireplace, beds that were little more than planks with thin mattresses. But it was shelter, and Emily sank onto a bench with relief. "We have maybe 2 hours before we need to move again," Daniel said, bringing her water and some hard biscuit. "Can you manage?" Emily nodded, though every muscle in her body protested. "They'll keep following, won't they? Judge Walker will send men to Denver, try to intercept us there. But I know people have favors to call in. We'll take a different route, avoid the main roads." He sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Your father, will he come after us himself?" "I don't know. He was there, I heard his voice, but—" Emily closed her eyes, seeing again her mother's face in the darkness, the strange gift of understanding she'd given. "He'll be devastated. Not just by my leaving, but by the public shame of it. His position at the bank, what little standing we had left. It's all gone now." "Do you regret—" "No." Emily opened her eyes, meeting his gaze firmly. "I meant what I said. No regrets. But that doesn't mean I don't feel the weight of what I've done." Daniel took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm that sent shivers through her despite her exhaustion. "In Cheyenne, we can build something new. You won't have to carry your family's disappointments anymore." "I'll carry them anyway," Emily said honestly. "They're part of me. But maybe I can carry them differently, as choices I made rather than burdens I bear." The station keeper returned, eyeing them with curiosity. "There's riders coming from the south. About 6 of them, moving fast." Daniel was on his feet immediately. "How far?" "Maybe 3 miles. You folks in some kind of trouble?" "Nothing that concerns you," Daniel said, pressing more coins into the man's hand. "But we'll be needing fresh horses." "Your fastest." The man grinned, revealing missing teeth. "For that price, you can have my best. But miss, you might want to consider changing. That dress of yours stands out like a beacon." Emily looked down at her traveling dress, now torn and muddy, but still obviously the garment of a town lady. The station keeper disappeared into a back room and returned with rough clothes, men's trousers, a shirt, a worn coat. "My boy's from before the fever took him. About your size, I reckon." Emily took the clothes, her hands trembling slightly. To wear men's clothing was another line crossed, another rule broken. But then, she'd already broken so many, what was one more? She changed quickly in the corner while Daniel kept watch. The trousers felt strange, scandalous, but also freeing. She could move properly, could ride without fighting yards of fabric. When she emerged, Daniel's expression was unreadable. You make a convincing boy from a distance, he said. Tuck your hair up under this. He handed her a battered hat. As Emily pinned her hair and pulled on the hat, she caught her reflection in a piece of mirror nailed to the wall. The person looking back was no one she recognized, neither the proper lady of Silver Ridge nor the woman who'd danced in Daniel's arms. This was someone altogether new, shaped by necessity and flight. They mounted fresh horses just as dust clouds appeared on the southern horizon. The station keeper pointed northwest. There's a canyon that way, about 5 miles. Easy to get lost in if you know the paths. Easy to get trapped if you don't. I know it, Daniel said. Thank you. Don't thank me. I never saw you. They rode hard again, Emily finding it easier in the trousers, her body adapting to the rhythm. Behind them, she could hear shouts echoing across the plains. Their pursuers had reached the station. But Daniel led them into the canyon he'd mentioned, and soon they were winding through a maze of red rock and shadow. They won't follow us here, he said when they finally slowed. Too dangerous without a guide, and Judge Walker's men are townfolk, not trackers. The canyon was beautiful in an alien way, all sharp edges and ancient stone. Emily had read about such places but never imagined she'd see them. They rode in silence for hours, the only sounds the horses' hooves on stone and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. As the sun reached its zenith, Daniel led them to a hidden grove where a spring bubbled up from the rocks. They dismounted and Emily practically fell into Daniel's arms, her legs refusing to hold her. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm not as strong as I thought. You're stronger than you know, he said, helping her to sit by the spring. You've been riding for 12 hours straight. Most people would have collapsed hours ago. Emily cupped water in her hands, drinking deeply, then splashed her face. The cold shocked her back to alertness. How much further to Denver? We're not going to Denver anymore. Too risky. There's a mining camp about 30 miles west. We can catch a freight wagon from there to Laramie, then take the train to Cheyenne. He sat beside her, pulling out more provisions from his saddlebags. It'll take longer, but it's safer. A mining camp, Emily repeated, trying to imagine it. I've read about them. Rough places. Very rough. You'll need to keep up the boy disguise, keep your head down, don't speak unless necessary. He looked at her seriously. Emily, the men there, they haven't seen a woman in months, some of them, if they realize what you are. I understand. She pulled the hat lower. I can do this. They rested for an hour, then rode on. The landscape changed as they climbed higher, the desert giving way to pine forests and mountain meadows. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, so vast that Emily felt like she might disappear into it entirely. As darkness began to fall, lights appeared ahead. The mining camp, a collection of tents and rough buildings clinging to the mountainside like mushrooms. Even from a distance, Emily could hear the noise, shouting, laughter, the tinny sound of a poorly played piano. Daniel led them to the edge of camp, where a large tent served as a makeshift stable. The man there, less rough than Emily expected, took their horses with barely a glance. Looking for Mac's outfit? He asked Daniel. They're heading to Laramie tomorrow dawn. That's the one, Daniel confirmed, his voice rougher than usual, fitting into this world with an ease that reminded Emily how little she really knew about his past. They made their way through the camp, Emily keeping her head down, her hands in her pockets. The smell hit her first. Unwashed bodies, cheap whiskey, something rotting. Then the sights. Men staggering drunk, fights breaking out and ending just as quickly. Women in low-cut dresses calling from tent flaps in voices that made Emily's cheeks burn, even though she didn't fully understand what they were offering. Daniel steered her quickly to a boarding tent that was marginally cleaner than the rest. The proprietor, a woman with hard eyes and harder lines around her mouth, looked them over. 2 beds? She asked. 1 room, Daniel said. My brother's young, needs looking after. The woman's gaze lingered on Emily for a moment that felt like forever. Then she shrugged. Your business. Payment up front. The room was barely large enough for a single bed and had walls so thin Emily could hear every conversation, every argument, every other sound from the adjoining spaces. She sat on the bed's edge, afraid to touch anything. I know it's not what you're used to, Daniel began. Nothing about this is what I'm used to, Emily said, then surprised herself by laughing. A week ago, my biggest scandal was dancing too long at a barn dance. Now I'm dressed as a boy in a mining camp running from the law. Daniel sat beside her, and even that simple proximity felt dangerous in this place where the normal rules clearly didn't apply. Are you frightened? Terrified, Emily admitted, but also, she searched for the right word, alive. More alive than I've ever been. Is that strange? No. Fear and freedom often feel the same at first. He took her hand, careful to make it look brotherly to anyone who might glance in. Try to sleep. Tomorrow will be harder. Emily lay down, fully clothed, the hat still pulled low. Daniel sat against the wall, keeping watch. Through the thin walls came the sounds of the camp's nightlife, fights, singing, weeping, and other sounds that made her pull the thin blanket over her head. But eventually, exhaustion won, and she slept. She woke to Daniel shaking her shoulder gently. Time to go. It was still dark, but the camp was stirring. They made their way to where Mac's freight wagons were loading. Mac himself was a giant of a man with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that missed nothing. You the ones needing passage to Laramie? He looked them over carefully. It's dangerous territory. Indians have been restless, and there's talk of bandits near South Pass. We can pay, Daniel said simply. Can you shoot? Yes. Mac's gaze moved to Emily. What about the boy? He can shoot, Daniel lied smoothly. He better be able to. Everyone earns their passage one way or another. Mac named a price that seemed enormous to Emily, but Daniel paid without haggling. We leave in 10 minutes. You ride in the supply wagon. The supply wagon was loaded with mining equipment, sacks of flour, and other goods. Emily and Daniel squeezed in among the cargo, using sacks as makeshift seats. As the wagon lurched into motion, Emily caught her last glimpse of the mining camp already being swallowed by morning mist. The journey to Laramie took 3 days. 3 days of bone-jarring travel, of sleeping under the wagon, of eating around the campfire with men who told stories that made Emily glad for her disguise. She learned to respond to boy without flinching, to spit tobacco juice, or pretend to walk with the rolling gait of someone used to riding. On the second night, they were attacked. It happened so fast Emily barely had time to scream. One moment they were settling in for sleep, the next the air was full of arrows and gunfire. Daniel threw her under the wagon, pressing a revolver into her hand. Only if they get close, he shouted over the noise. Then he was gone, firing from behind a boulder. Emily lay there, the gun heavy in her shaking hands, watching boots run past, hearing men scream. A figure dropped beside the wagon, one of the bandits, she realized, reaching for the supplies. Without thinking, she raised the gun and fired. The man jerked and fell. Emily stared at him, at the spreading dark stain on his shirt, unable to process what she'd done. Then Daniel was there, pulling her out, holding her as she shook. You saved the supplies, Mac said later, after the bandits had fled and they were counting their dead. 2 of Mac's men, 4 bandits. That took courage, boy. Emily said nothing. She couldn't stop seeing the man fall, couldn't stop feeling the gun's kick in her hand. Daniel stayed close that night, and when she woke crying from nightmares, he held her despite the risk of their disguise being discovered. The first kill is always the hardest, Mac said the next morning, misreading her distress. But out here, it's kill or be killed. You did what you had to do. Laramie appeared on the 3rd day like a miracle. A real town with real buildings and a train station with gleaming rails that led to Cheyenne. They said goodbye to Mac, who shook Emily's hand with surprising gentleness. You did good, boy. Your brother's lucky to have you. At the station, Daniel bought tickets while Emily waited, still in her boy's clothes, still feeling the weight of the last few days. When the train arrived, belching steam and noise, she almost cried with relief. Their compartment was small but private. As soon as the door closed, Emily collapsed onto the bench, pulling off the hat and letting her hair fall free. It's over, Daniel said, sitting beside her. The worst is over. In a few hours, we'll be in Cheyenne and you can be yourself again. Can I? Emily looked at her hands, still dirty from the trail, one with a blood stain she couldn't quite wash out. I don't know who that is anymore. The girl from Silver Ridge is gone. The boy from the mining camp was a lie. Who am I now? Daniel took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're Emily Carter, the bravest woman I've ever known. You're a survivor, a fighter, a woman who chose her own path despite everything. He kissed her forehead gently. And you're mine, if you'll still have me after all this. Yours, Emily repeated, tasting the word. In Silver Ridge, belonging to someone had meant being owned, controlled. But this felt different. And you're mine? Completely. She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and transformation into it. When they pulled apart, the train was moving, carrying them away from everything they'd escaped and toward everything they might become. Tell me about Cheyenne again, she said, curling against his side. It's rough, he said honestly. Not as bad as the mining camp, but still rough. The buildings are new, some still being built. The streets are mud when it rains, dust when it doesn't. There are more saloons than churches, more brothels than schools. But there's opportunity there, Emily. Room to be whoever you want to be. And the newspaper? The Cheyenne Tribune. The editor, Nathan Hayes, is expecting you. Well, he's expecting E.A. Carter. He doesn't know you're a woman yet. Emily laughed, surprising herself. Another disguise? Only if necessary. Nathan's progressive, might not care as long as you can write. The landscape outside the window was changing, the mountains giving way to vast plains. Emily watched it pass, this new world she was entering. Somewhere behind them, Silver Ridge was dealing with the scandal of her disappearance. Her father was probably drowning his shame in whiskey. Lydia was playing the perfect wife while dying inside. Her mother was probably the only one who understood. I need to write to my mother, Emily said suddenly. Not now, but someday. When it's safe. Of course. And Daniel? We need to marry, soon. Not for respectability, but for us. To make this real, official, ours. He squeezed her hand. As soon as we're settled. I promise. The train whistle sounded long and lonely across the plains. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of the rails, the steady movement toward their new life. She thought about the woman who'd stood at her sister's wedding holding wildflowers, invisible and resigned to her fate. That woman would be horrified by what Emily had become. A woman in trousers who'd shot a man, who'd ridden through the night with outlaws on her trail, who'd chosen love and freedom over everything safe and known. But that woman had also been slowly dying inside, suffocating under the weight of others' expectations. This new Emily, forged in flight and fear and fierce determination, was fully alive. Scarred, perhaps. Changed, certainly, but alive in a way she'd never imagined possible. Look, Daniel said, pointing out the window. There it is. Cheyenne rose from the plains like something out of a dream, or a nightmare, depending on perspective. Even from a distance, Emily could see it was everything Daniel had described. Raw, new, chaotic, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Are you ready? Daniel asked. Emily thought about the question seriously. Was she ready for whatever came next? Ready to build a life in this wild place? Ready to write under a false name or fight for the right to use her real one? Ready to be Daniel's wife in a town where being a wife might mean something entirely different than it had in Silver Ridge? I'm ready, she said, and meant it. The train began to slow, and Emily quickly pinned her hair back up, though she kept the women's clothes on now. She was done hiding, done pretending to be less than she was. Whatever Cheyenne threw at her, she would face it as herself, changed, hardened perhaps, but undeniably Emily Carter. As they gathered their few belongings, Daniel paused. Emily, I need to tell you something. I haven't been entirely honest about my past. Her heart stopped. What do you mean? My name is Daniel Barrett, that's true, and I am a surveyor and guide. But before that, he took a deep breath. I was married. She died 5 years ago in childbirth along with the baby. I came west to escape those memories. Emily absorbed this, another piece of the puzzle that was Daniel clicking into place. Is that why you understood? About being trapped by expectations? Partly. Sarah was a good woman, but our marriage was arranged by our families. We were fond of each other, but it wasn't what we have. When she died, I felt guilty for being relieved that I was free. I swore I'd never marry again unless it was for love, real love, the kind that makes you crazy enough to throw everything away. And now? Now I've found it. He cupped her face in his hands. I should have told you sooner. We all have pasts, Emily interrupted. What matters is our future. The train stopped with a final shriek of brakes. Through the window, Emily could see the platform crowded with people. Cowboys, businessmen, women both respectable and not, children running wild, everyone in motion, everyone heading somewhere. Daniel opened the compartment door and offered her his hand. Ready to start that future? Emily took his hand, feeling its familiar warmth and strength. Together they stepped off the train and into the chaos of Cheyenne. The noise hit her first, shouting, hammering, horses, music from multiple saloons all clashing together. Then the smells, wood smoke, manure, fresh lumber, bread baking, whiskey. It was overwhelming and exhilarating. Mr. Barrett! They turned to see a young man approaching, neat despite the dust that seemed to coat everything here. I'm James from the Tribune. Mr. Hayes sent me to meet you. This is E.A. Carter, Daniel said carefully. James's eyes widened slightly as he took in Emily's appearance, clearly female despite the rough clothes, but he recovered quickly. Mr. Hayes is eager to meet you, Miss Carter. Miss Carter is fine, Emily said firmly, and I'm eager to meet him. As they followed James through the streets of Cheyenne, dodging horses and wagons and the occasional fist fight, Emily felt something she hadn't expected, not fear or regret or even uncertainty, but a wild joy. This place was nothing like Silver Ridge with its rigid rules and suffocating propriety. This was a town being born, rough and raw and real. Here, she could be anything, anyone. Here, she could write her own story from the very beginning. Daniel squeezed her hand as they walked, and she squeezed back. They'd made it this far against all odds. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The Tribune office was a modest building squeezed between a saloon and a general store. Nathan Hayes, the editor, was younger than Emily had expected, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked her over with frank assessment. So, you're E.A. Carter. Daniel's telegram was quite enthusiastic about your writing abilities. I hope to live up to his recommendation, Mr. Hayes. Can you write about more than ladies' charity events and church socials? Mr. Hayes, I just spent 3 days in a freight wagon fighting off bandits. I think I can manage more than social notes. He laughed, sudden and genuine. I think you'll do just fine, Miss Carter. When can you start? Tomorrow, if you'll have me. Tomorrow it is. The pay isn't much. It's enough, Emily said. It was her money, earned by her work. That alone made it worth more than anything she'd had in Silver Ridge. As they left the Tribune office, Daniel pointed down the street. The boarding house is that way. It's not fancy, but it's clean and the landlady is discreet. And then? Then we start building our life. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Emily, I know this isn't what you imagined when you dreamed of marriage and family. No, she agreed. It's better. It's real. Standing there in the muddy street of Cheyenne, with the sun setting behind the mountains and the whole frontier spreading out before them, Emily felt the last chains of her old life fall away. She was no longer the overlooked sister, the dutiful daughter, the girl who read about adventures but never had them. She was Emily Carter, frontier writer, soon-to-be wife of a man who'd crossed a wilderness to claim her, survivor of flight and fight and transformation. The old Emily would have been terrified. This Emily was ready for whatever came next. As they walked toward their new life, arm in arm despite the stares it drew, Emily thought she heard something on the wind, not the church bells of Silver Ridge calling her back to safety, but something wilder, the sound of possibility, of freedom, of a future written by her own hand. Behind them, the train that had brought them whistled once more and pulled away, carrying with it the last physical connection to their old lives. Emily didn't look back. She was too busy looking forward, into the setting sun, into Daniel's eyes, into tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. They traveled far from that wedding in Silver Ridge where Daniel had walked past the bride to claim her instead. But in truth, Emily thought, the real journey was just beginning.